G'day, I'm Owen, you've joined the pub test, and this one is a pivotal episode in this series. Now, I've done a lot of overviews and presenting different ideas, but perhaps in the last video or so, I may have been putting in my own confirmation bias in how I was delivering the information. And when it comes to the Mary Kelly crime, it's a really complicated one because it's such a mystery. Like, Mary Kelly herself still remains quite a mysterious person about her actual heritage, who she was, even what she looked like. And when we look at the eyewitnesses, the testimony that they gives also adds to this mystery as well. So what I did was take a step back. I said, Owen, you've got to forget everything you know about Jack the Ripper. In fact, don't even consider this a Jack the Ripper crime. What if someone presented you the evidence? What conclusion would you draw? So that's what I will do. I will present what is recorded that people heard or saw around the time of November the 9th, 1888. And then I'm going to state my conclusion to what really happened in Miller's Court. So you might want to start doing some of these ones, getting those hands and fingers warmed up, because you'll be smashing into that keyboard, trust me. But hear out the evidence as I step through it and see if this conclusion passes the pub test. Would a reasonable, rational person say, you know what? There could be some merit to what you are saying. So this will not be an overview. I will be stating quite a strong opinion of what happened in Miller's Court. So let's get a quick rundown leading up to the events of November the 9th, 1888. So on October the 30th, Mary Kelly and her boyfriend, Joseph or Joe Barnett, we might refer to him as Joe through this, though there was another Joe in Mary Kelly's life, but that's not related to this scenario at all, I don't think. But regardless, they had an argument there at 13 Miller's Court. A window got broken, and the key to the house got lost, or so we're told. But what caused this fight? Well, Joe says that Mary was now allowing other women to use that room for those nighttime activities. And he didn't like that one bit. Now, I could probably understand why he felt strongly about it. If you were meant to be living there, and any sort of thing could be going on. Now remember, 13 Miller's Court was not a large dwelling. It was 3 meters by 3 meters, so that's about 10 or 11 foot square. And not only that, you had people living above you and around you. If you went into that court, it was high density dwellings, absolutely. So without much space, I can understand why you really wouldn't want to be sharing it. Like, you just sometimes want to go home and just relax, and you go home and you find other people in your room doing things you really don't want to see. I understand why you'd be a bit annoyed. But Joe and Mary fighting wasn't that uncommon. They both got on the drink a bit, and Mary was known when she had a few, she could rumble with the best of them. But it is said that Joe kept coming back to visit, and their relationship wasn't irreparable at this stage. But interestingly, Mary seems to make a friend of Maria Harvey, who was also working as an unfortunate, but also had a job in a laundry. And it said that Maria Harvey actually stayed overnight with Mary on the nights of the 5th and the 6th of November, and then she found her own place on November the 7th. But also on November the 7th, Mary Kelly goes to McCarthy's shop, which is on the corner of the building. It's facing Dorset Street, but is still attached to this Miller's Court complex, and buys some candles. Now, if McCarthy himself was manning the shop, that is a little bit surprising, because it's said that she owed 6 weeks of rent. So having the money to go and buy a candle and perhaps not get accosted for that back rent would be a bit surprising. But the next video after this one will actually be diving into McCarthy and the finding of the body. And that too is a wild story when you break it down. But we'll leave that for now because we've got still a lot to look at just in the eyewitnesses and what they saw. Perhaps going just a little bit off topic, but it does circle back as we go through this scenario. Sarah Lewis was at Bethnal Green Road with a friend of hers. So that's not too far from Miller's Court. So Sarah Lewis was walking with a friend, and a scruffy looking bloke with a bag, possibly a medical style bag, basically hit him up and said, "Hey, one of you come down this laneway with me. I don't really care which one. I'll make it worth your while." Both of them say no, and then he got a bit angry about it. She does tell the police this later and says she even saw him again at one stage. And the suggestion is maybe this bloke was Jack the Ripper. But Sarah Lewis herself is at Miller's Court on November the 9th, which we'll get to. But on November the 8th, Julia Venturney, who lived at 1 Miller's Court, so she could see apparently directly down into Mary Kelly's room, saw Mary with another woman having breakfast. Now it is of note this was at 10 a.m. and it suggested this was the normal time Mary Kelly would be getting up, or perhaps a little bit later. Who that woman was, we actually don't know because no description is given yet. Maria Harvey is known to have come back and spent the afternoon with Mary Kelly. So yes, that was the woman that stayed with her on the 5th and the 6th. But she also left a range of clothing at Miller's Court. A couple of shirts, a boy's shirt, a black overcoat, a black bonnet, and some other items. Now, where did she get that clothing? And why did she leave it at Mary Kelly's? Now, Maria didn't shed any light on why she left these clothes, or even if she did leave those clothes. But a suggestion has been made that perhaps Maria stole these clothes from the laundry, gave them to Mary to go and sell. Because clothing, you couldn't just go into Target or other places like that and pick up a few cheap shirts. Clothing was expensive. People didn't have a lot of gear. So if you could get your hands on a bit of clothing that was decent, well, you could make a little bit of profit, a bit of money. And so perhaps they were running a little scheme, it was suggested. Now, Elizabeth Prater, who lived at 20 Miller's Court, and that was the room directly above Mary Kelly's room, well, she, at 5 p.m., leaves her apartment, and I call it an apartment, and she heads out. Nothing really of note, but it's just important because she also comes back into this story. There's a lot of people we are trying to keep track of, so you'll see things popping up on the screen, and they're not the actual pictures of these people. I just have to state at this point before anyone gets upset, but there are no pictures of these people that I could find anywhere, but just so we have the visual representation, I'm putting up some images so that when that image comes up, you remember exactly the person we're talking about. Otherwise, we will get lost in this. But now it's 7 p.m. and 7:45 p.m. Between this time, Joe Barnett says that he turned up to visit Mary, as was his custom, to go and see her. They have a chat, and he leaves at 7:45, and they were on friendly terms. There was no dramas there at all. But during that time, Lizzie Albrook, who also lives in Miller's Court, apparently visited Mary, and Mary said to Lizzie, "Whatever you do, don't do the wrong that I've done and turn out as I have." Words to that effect. That's important to note. We will get back to that. But Joe nor Lizzie mention each other as seeing each other there at all. Was there something more to the fact that they didn't mention each other? Well, could have just been a passing comment and Lizzie was going. So maybe not a big event in Joe's mind, and Lizzie seeing Joe there probably didn't rate either. So who knows? But I just find it funny that neither of them mentioned each other. Now, Julia Venturney, she comes back now at around 8 p.m. Goes up to her room to sleep. Now, she's the one living directly opposite from Mary Kelly. Says she didn't really sleep, she only dozed. Though we will question how much she was actually dozing and actually maybe really sleeping, but we'll look into that also. But it looks like Mary Kelly's decided to go out for a night on the town. So she's out with Elizabeth Foster drinking at the 10 Bells Hotel, which was on Commercial Road. Then it said, not long after this, Maurice Lewis sees her at the Horn of Plenty, another pub. And then it's reported not long after that she is seen quite drunk at the Britannia. So that was 11 p.m. she's reported at that place. The next official confirmed sighting was from Mary Cox, who lived at 5 Miller's Court. Now, she also was an unfortunate. And we say unfortunate, but like Mary, she could obviously have a room in this Miller's Court area, which was a bit of a luxury. Despite the cramped conditions, if you had a permanent lodging place, not just one of these DOS houses where your room could get rent out if you didn't have the money for the night, a permanent location was something that these people would have desperately held on to. So Mary Cox was in the same situation as Mary Kelly. But Mary Cox sees Kelly coming back with a short, stout bloke with a carroty mustache. And they're heading to Mary Kelly's room. And Kelly turns to Mary Cox and says, I'm up for a bit of a song tonight. I'm going to do a bit of singing, which I find a bit odd considering the transaction that was probably going to take place by bringing that bloke back to the room. But anyway, she does start singing. And she appears to be singing the one song, which I believe was entitled Only a Violet I Plucked from My Mother's Grave When I Was a Boy. Sounds like a really, really cheerful song, that one. I think it would have made the top 10 today for sure. But many people heard her singing. In fact, Catherine Pickett, who lived in Miller's Court upstairs, she says to her husband, why is this woman singing so loudly? Go down and do something about it. And the husband says, look, leave the poor woman alone. She's just singing. Just go back to sleep. So nobody goes downstairs to knock on the door and say, would you mind just cutting it out, please? You know, it's a bit assaulting to the ears. I don't know, maybe she sang really well. Who's to know? But Mary Cox comes back to Miller's Court at 1 p.m. because she left at 11:45, saw Mary Kelly's light on, and she was still singing. Now, Elizabeth Prater returns back to Miller's Court. She left earlier in the day, and it said she's now waiting for some bloke that she either shared living arrangements with or something like that, and she's hanging around outside Miller's Court. She at one stage said she didn't see anybody, but then another version of events, she turns around and says she was talking to McCarthy from McCarthy's shop during this 1 to 1:20 p.m. But at 1:30, she returns into Miller's Court, sees no light in Mary Kelly's room, and there's no singing. So somewhere between 1:05 a.m. and 1:30 a.m., the lights have gone out and the singing has stopped. Now, George Hutchinson now makes an appearance back into this saga. At 2 a.m., he states that Mary Kelly approached him asking for some money. She was with another bloke, definitely not the short, stout, carroty mustache dude that she was with before. In fact, he gives such a detailed description that many people doubt whether or not he was even there. But it is stated that Mary Kelly approached him, spoke to him, and then went into Miller's Court with this bloke. At 2:25 a.m., Sarah Lewis, the person that was accosted verbally by that bloke a couple of days prior, is going into Miller's Court after a fight with her husband. Now, she either had friends or maybe it was her parents. It's not exactly stated what, but somebody lived there that she knew, and she was going in to spend the night, going to sleep in an armchair because, again, these rooms aren't very big. Now, she says as she's approaching Miller's Court, she sees a bloke across the other side of the street, which lends itself to suggest that perhaps it was George Hutchinson hanging around as he said he was because he was concerned for Mary. But she definitely saw a bloke hanging around. And then in Miller's Court, she saw a bloke and a woman, but it was too dark, she couldn't recognize him, and she just went up to the room. So at 3 a.m., Hutchinson, he says, look, I've had enough. No one's come out. I'm off. It's getting cold. 3 a.m. He disappears. But at the same time, roughly, Mary Cox returns into Miller's Court and says there was no light and no singing in Mary Kelly's room. She went to her room to go to sleep, but she couldn't drop off to sleep at all. But she said she didn't hear a thing. Now, Elizabeth Prater is woken by her cat, and apparently the cat's name was Diddles. Don't ask me why the cat's name is Diddles. You'd have to ask her, but there you go. Diddles the cat wakes her up, and during that time she hears a faint cry of, like, "Oh, murder," words to that effect. But then Sarah Lewis, who is sleeping in an armchair, gets woken up, and she said it sounded like that cry of murder was right outside her door. But both state it was around the 3:30 or a bit after when they both heard this cry. But as the sun begins to rise, so around 5 a.m, various noises are heard in the court, people getting ready for work, people leaving for work. One person states they heard footsteps leaving Miller's Court without a door closing. But no one thinks anything of it because this is now the general time when people are out and about. Now, the medical evidence suggests that this crime in 13 Miller's Court happened anywhere between 1 a.m. to later on in the morning, possibly as late as 5 a.m. They couldn't be 100% sure, but one doctor particularly says, no, it happened earlier. It happened around 1 a.m. for sure, but it definitely occurred within 10 hours of them actually getting access to the body, and that is also a video for another time. It won't even be covered in the next video. It'll be the one after that, and that's a wild story in itself, the delay it took to get into the room. But there's two more eyewitnesses that painted a very different picture. Between 8 and 8:30 a.m., Carolyn Maxwell, who lived at 14 Dorset Street, saw Mary Kelly at 8 a.m. in the morning. And Mary Kelly must have looked absolutely woeful, but Mary Kelly says to Caroline, "The horrors of drink are upon me. I've just been sick." And Caroline's like, yeah, you look after yourself. You don't look so crash hot. Yeah, you must have had a rough one. But then later, at 9 a.m., between 9 and 9:30 a.m., Caroline Maxwell says she saw Mary Kelly outside the Britannia Hotel with a short, stout-looking bloke who had a nice jacket on. And then Maurice Lewis at 10 a.m., now, he saw her at a different pub the night before. Apparently, Maurice Lewis knew Mary Kelly quite well. He said, I saw her at 10 a.m. inside the Britannia Hotel. Now, the rough timing of events when the body was found in 13 Miller's Court was 10:45 a.m. There's no way Mary Kelly could be at the Britannia Hotel at 10 a.m. And in fact, Lewis is not even considered a credible witness at all. He's discounted. Carolyn Maxwell, at the inquest, she gets bullied into basically recanting her statement and says, no, well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I got the wrong day. And they don't really want to hear from the medical person either. As I said in that inquest, it got shut down really quick. But I did make the statement that the general population were not that concerned anymore in the crime. That was not exactly true. There were a lot of people forming crowds around Miller's Court. There were people up in arms about what was going on. In fact, there were people questioning whether or not it was actually Mary Kelly in the room. To the point that a policeman got a bit frustrated, apparently clocked some poor bloke. And then the crowd got a bit angry, and this copper had to foot it back as quick as he could to a police station, and a few police had to go out and calm the crowds down and restrain them from getting in to bash this bloke. So no, tensions were still very high from some people on the street. And interestingly, there was debate on that day if they'd found Mary Kelly in the room. And so the mystery surrounding this crime seems to continue. And yet, I will state what I honestly believe from looking at all of the evidence, what actually happened. And yes, I believe Mary Kelly survived. She wasn't the person found in that room. Joseph Barnett played a part in it too, as I think you'll see. And so did short, stout, carroty mustache dude. I think the three of them conspired to commit this heinous crime. Now, before you start smashing those keyboards and saying, Owen, you have totally lost the plot, hear me out. Because this is compelling reasoning. And if this is true, well, it flips the script totally on the Jack the Ripper saga. Because perhaps this crime wasn't one of them. To start with, this fight that Joe Barnett and Mary Kelly had where the key got lost is of interest. Now, all of a sudden, Mary Kelly is befriending many of these women on the street and letting them use the room, and some staying in the room. And I think that is critical to this story. See, Joe Barnett now is removed from the situation. He's away. And perhaps Mary Kelly was finding somebody that perhaps received an inheritance, maybe had a little bit of money that they could lure to the room and do away with them. And you might think, well, that's a huge stretch. But I find the comment that Mary Kelly said to Lizzie Albrook quite interesting. And if you know you're not going to see someone for a long time, or perhaps you're not going to see someone ever again, we often consider our comment, what we're going to say to them, because we want them to remember it. So in passing, you just wouldn't say, hey, what are you doing tonight? Oh, yep, no worries. Have a good one. See you later. No, Mary Kelly imparted a good life lesson to Lizzie. Basically, stay on the right path. Don't do what I've done. To me, that was a measured comment of someone who knew that they were going to disappear. They were not going to be in Miller's Court the following night. Then Mary Kelly has to establish that Joe Barnett's visited, but he's long gone. He's now at his lodging. She's very well much alive, so she is obviously seen at not just one establishment, but 3 of them. And to be noticed the way she was, particularly at the Britannia, it would suggest making a bit of a spectacle of herself. And she very well could have been stone rolling drunk, because it didn't really matter, but she could have also been acting it out a little bit as well. She returns back to Miller's Court with short, stout, carroty mustache dude. They go into the room. But she's singing the whole time. That I find strange, considering a different business transaction was probably expected by a client, not just sitting down listening to somebody sing. But could the singing have been cover for something else that was happening in the room? But we know her light went off at 1:05 a.m. and the singing had stopped. Nobody saw anybody leave the room, but obviously she had left the room. But normally I'd say we really can't trust Hutchie. His story doesn't pass the pub test, except Sarah Lewis saw him on the other side of the road. And then when she went into Miller's Court, she did see a couple, a woman and a man. So it would seem that Mary Kelly has gone out, found another client, but you'd say, Owen, why on earth would she not go to the room? Why would she stay out in Miller's Court? Well, I'll just state here, there's a possibility that Carroty Mustache Dude is still in that room. And I'm suggesting that the actual victim's already in that room then too, around the 2 a.m. mark. Now, the bloke that Mary Kelly was now with would not be expecting necessarily to go to a room. Many of the unfortunates just knew some dark, secluded spots where you could get some privacy, away from the police, away from the meagre streetlights that were around. So ducking into Miller's Court for this bloke wouldn't have seemed weird. Now, there's an important note to make here, that between these hours, people would have seen Mary Kelly's room if there was this large roaring fire that had to have occurred in the room. The fire was that strong, it melted the kettle spout. So we're not just talking a little fire to keep you warm here. This was an inferno in that fireplace. And it's said that with that amount of intensity in the fire, the light would have basically shone up Miller's Court through her window. Well, it didn't do that because the fire, no doubt, started later, when the fire wouldn't have been noticed. Because it is said when they did finally get that door down, and we'll cover that in a couple of videos' time, the room was still rather warm. And remembering this is November, it's cold over there in England. As opposed to Australia, you'd expect it to be warm regardless. But no, that was strange. So that fire had to have been started later. There's no way the fire was started at 2 a.m. But then we have the cry of murder around 4 a.m. Now, why do that? Well, for two reasons. Joe Barnett, at that time, was firmly establishing his alibi that he was nowhere near Miller's Court. His alibi is absolutely rock solid. But also, you'd just be testing the waters to see if anyone is going to come down and check it out. Nobody does. You're still not going to leave the room, though. But it's only about an hour or so later that the court and the street starts coming to life. People are out and about. People are getting ready for work. It's at this point, carroty mustache dude could easily slip away. And maybe he doesn't have the mustache anymore either. And it does seem from the eyewitness accounts that at that time in the morning, people weren't exactly peering out to see what's going on. They're just like, okay, those people are up. They're doing what they're doing. Let them have at it. So it's a perfect time for someone to slip away and just disappear. And I'd be suggesting now that at 5:30 a.m. it's Mary Kelly who is lighting that fire in that room for a couple of reasons. One, burning any evidence possible. And I just don't mean evidence of the crime scene, but any evidence of her existence. Except for the clothes neatly folded on the chair, which were her clothes. That would establish who the person was on the bed. But why lock the door? Because remember, the door was found locked, so someone had the key. I would suggest that that was Mary Kelly. And someone at 7 a.m. did come down and knock on the door to try and borrow something. It's possible that if you didn't lock your door, someone could just open it and just have a look to see if the thing they wanted to borrow happened to be there. So you lock the door just to prevent someone finding the body too soon, because you need to distance yourself a little bit. Now, the crime could have come unstuck when Caroline Maxwell sees her on the street at around that 8 a.m. mark. But even the way Mary Kelly acted, now she probably thought, okay, if this happens, I can't act too weird. But I can certainly act like I'm hungover. Because one, she may have been, but there's another second thing. If you ever talk to a crime scene cleaner, they say the mess that they clean up is not the actual crime as a general rule. Yes, they have to clean that up a bit, but the biggest mess is made by the people investigating the crimes because they are physically ill at the sight they're seeing. And what the sight in Mary Kelly's room would have been that absolutely horrifying. That would make you physically ill. And if she had to stay in that room for the amount of time I believe she did, she would have come out very green looking. But interestingly, Caroline Maxwell says she was wearing different clothing that she hadn't seen her wear before. Remember, Caroline Maxwell saw her with a short, stout bloke at the Britannia who had that jacket. Was it the jacket that was left by the person who stayed with Mary Kelly on the nights of the 5th and the 6th? It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's the same looking bloke who was with her that first trip into Miller's Court who went into the room, and now she's seen with the same type of looking bloke with a jacket. But why did Caroline Maxwell change her mind at the inquest and say, maybe I got the wrong day? Because it actually seems strange that she would have got the wrong day. Because November the 9th was her husband's payday. The Lord Mayor's show or something like that was in town. And it was a special day at the laundry where she worked because it was Clean Pinny Day, which is cleaning your apron, I believe. But you can let me know if that is wrong in comments. But it was a day of the week that stuck in those people's minds. Now, when a big event happens, unfortunately, I've never had this actually happen to me where someone close to me has just suddenly passed away like that. But I can recall a couple of events where things have happened on a world scene where I can tell you exactly where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing, because those events stick in your mind. And I just find it hard to believe that Caroline Maxwell got the day wrong considering those events. Now, Maurice Lewis, he's just discounted. He's, never happened, buddy. You could not have seen her. That's an impossibility. But a lot of people believed on that day that it wasn't Mary Kelly in that room. And he stuck to it. But they didn't even call him to the inquest. They said, we don't want to hear from you because you're a nutter. But it's likely that he did see her, that she was still very much alive. Well, Joe Barnett, he comes back into this. He's asked to identify the body. And how that went down reminds me of what my wife said on our honeymoon. That just was way too quick. He identified that body immediately, said that's Mary Kelly. Yet, he left because she was allowing other women to use the room. If you cared for someone, you wouldn't want to believe that it could be that person who met their demise in such a horrific way. I mean, you might not be able to, I don't think I could look at the body. Put it that way. It would do me. I wouldn't be able to do it, but I'd say, look, I can't look, but it could be her, but I don't know for sure. I'm hoping it's not. Because the body was messed up beyond all recognition. They really had nothing to identify the body with other than the clothing and other than that it was her room. But realistically, it could have almost been anyone. But they did take Joe Barnett in and interview him for 5 hours, but his alibi was rock solid. But from the time of 10 a.m., when Mary Kelly's last seen, to the time when they actually get into the room, Joe Barnett's being interviewed, it's well into the night now. She's had plenty of time just to disappear. And what's also of note is Joe Barnett disappears off the radar completely. He's not in any census. He's not recorded as working anywhere. But he pops up again 18 years later at Billingsgate Market, where he's working as a porter again. And he's now living with Louisa Barnett. They both lived there until 1926, when in November of that year they both pass away within a couple of weeks of each other. Louisa first, and then Joe. I'm making a suggestion here, and this is a bit of speculation, that Louisa and Mary Kelly were one and the same person. But people would say, wouldn't she be recognised? Well, the funny thing is, many of the descriptions we have of Mary Kelly actually are vastly different. Some people called her Black Mary. Other people said she had red hair. Most of what we know about her came from Joe Barnett himself, whether it be her family history, her life leading up to the time in Whitechapel. She could have been anybody. So it would be nothing for her to take that name Louisa and just go off and live a life. I mean, what was Joe Barnett doing for that 18 years? How did he support himself? He bounced back pretty well 18 years later. So did they get some money from somewhere? Well, it's speculation, but I think it's reasonable to conclude that perhaps there was some money involved in this crime. Because yes, Mary Kelly was in debt for 6 weeks' rent, and it would seem an extreme reaction to try and just not pay that 6 weeks by getting involved in this particular endeavour. But I would say people have done a lot worse for a lot less. Yet I do think it was more like the William Berry story, that they possibly found someone who got a little bit of inheritance, a little bit of money, and so they could do 2 birds, 1 stone. Clear that 6 weeks debt, no problem, and disappear, and no one will come looking for you. But you've got a little nest egg to fall back on. And you've had the time to plan this. And using the cover of these Jack the Ripper crimes, well, you might just get away with it. But why was the inquest itself then shut down? Why did they not want to bring this evidence out? Well, that will be covered in the video after the next one. because there was a lot going on behind the scenes as regards the police as well. And when the body is found, there's some massive questions to be raised about that as well. And that's the next video coming out. But what do you think of this? Do you think that there was these 3 people involved committing this atrocity at Miller's Court just for their own gain? Or do you think I have gone way off the deep end? Let me know if this passes the pub test. And I'm just saying, if it does, as I believe the evidence points to that that's how the events went down, it totally changes how we would look at so many of the other crimes. In fact, the sticking point for many suspects is this particular scene. How did they get access to the room? How were they able to perpetrate this crime undetected? Because there was one other detail about the crime scene itself, in that there appeared to be a mark on the thumb of the victim which suggested that they were trying to defend themselves, which is unique to all the other crimes. But I'm very interested to see what you have down in comments. If I've missed any of the evidence, or you think I've just misinterpreted things a little, perhaps put a bit of confirmation bias into it as well along the way. Let me know. The next 2 videos are also quite alarming in the sense of what was going on that particular day. This whole crime just raises so many questions about what on earth was actually really going on. But if you have made it this far, thank you very, very much for watching. It genuinely is appreciated. Like and subscribe, do all those usuals. I'm Owen, you've been watching The Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one.